Hello and welcome. My name is Matty, and this is the next episode of Vocation. Once again, I'm very pleased to announce I'm joined by the great Michael Tsarion, and today we're going to be going over one more of Michael's articles titled The Red Papacy. It continues on from our previous discussions on who runs the world, and today it's going to be focusing more on the Vatican and their role. Can you tell us a little bit, Michael, about sort of the Vatican, about the importance of it in terms of sort of the world order and sort of the power dynamics with that? Maybe just a little bit about what we'll be going through.
Oh, yes. Thank
Cheers.
you, Matty. Nice to see you. Well, this is a subject I've been very interested in for many, many years, and it finally culminated in this article, which I always look at as being part of the larger picture of my Irish origins work. Because if you scroll back in time to the 9th, 10th century when the Vatican invaded Ireland and tried to crush the Celtic Church there, we have a massive imperial concern operating. Then you can look at the work of Ralph Ellis, which ties into this. He goes back to the 1st century, and the 3rd century, this kind of thing, showing you how it wasn't Constantine that formed Christianity per se. It was Josephus, who put it together. And that means then that in order to grasp that point, you have to be able to anatomize it, that is, break it down into different parts. There's some sort of atonism there from Egypt. There's this Parthian solar cultism. There's this aspect of Judaism, but even that needs to be highly dissected because it breeds a lot of confusion when you say that. Because what we would call Essenism or Nazarenism is very, very different, than what was other schools of Judaism, which most people don't even know anything about that, And then there was this pagan element. The Josephus was clever, and his followers were clever to incorporate pagan gods, especially things like Dionysus, the old Tammuz, the old Attis, but Horus as well, and others as other gods that were well known. These were solar gods. Mithra would have been a big one. So this is all the hodgepodge that's been imposed upon the world by this so-called fifth sect, if you want to use that term, that we now know as the papacy. But it's a complete ruse because this is a mishmash, a hodgepodge, a concoction.
Yeah.
What does that got to do with what Christians imagine it to do with, right? When you confront these people. I forgot to even mention the wider astrotheology component, which goes back to the dawn of time. That's more than just solar worship. There's all of these elements, and probably more. Yeah, there is. There's this, tree symbolism, tree worship of the old Druids that's in there. Then there's a bit of a smattering of goddess traditions, which I think we've touched on before, right? So there's a lot going on there, from the Persian, from the Scythian, from the Hyksos, and all the rest of it. This is a massive, massive amalgamation of traditions. The Christian knows nothing about this and has just accepted it wholesale. But what this is an imposture. And by the way, back to my point about when it took over the Celtic Church, it adopted their mores as well. You see, it didn't just crush. This is what the average Christian, the average normie thinks. An act of conquest is just to crush your enemy and be done with it. No, it's to scalp them and keep the scalp. It's to rob them of their traditions. Funny enough, this is a piece that people just do not understand, do not get. You've got to be on your more elevated level of like a Joseph Campbell or something like that to really see and detect, where did they get that trait? This Black Madonna that just appears in Christianity, the whole cult of the Virgin Mary, and the obsession around that in the Middle Ages. See, where did that come from? People think that's endemic to Christianity. No, it's not. It's not. And many other things as well. The crucified Savior, that's not endemic to Christianity. The story of a cup and a Last Supper, that's not. And on you could go, right? In fact, most of the motifs. And by the way, I forgot to mention another one, a huge one. The reliance on the gospel writers on old Greek, sort of, let's call it Homeric traditions. They're more than that. There's Plato in there as well, subtly, the whole idea of a logos that you find in St. John. In the beginning was the Word. That's not Christian. That
That's way
comes
too many.
straight
Yeah.
out of the Greek tradition.
Mhm.
And maybe one day we'll even do a podcast to show just how absolutely deep that goes when you get into
Mhm.
it. You see, because this
Yeah.
idea of the spoken word and many of these other concepts, especially those that turn up in the book of John and the Apocalypse, as we said, then the book of Revelation was a repurposing of the ancient Sibylline oracles. Ask a Christian, what are the Sibylline oracles? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the book of Revelation? Of course, it's in my top pocket here. What are you talking about? See, but
Yeah.
no, they don't make a. So this is what's going on, and that was a series of oracles and prophecies. Yet in the modern day, that's meant to be nixed. You don't have anything like that. Any magical prophetics, it's all disallowed. Divine revelation from God, yeah, we can accept that, but nothing more. Wait a minute, your whole book of Revelation has the thinnest veneer, but behind that thin veneer and the name of a man slapped on it on the top, that was entirely a book of prophecy, that the Roman emperors and their wives and all the nobility of Rome and many, and besides that, other countries would travel far to consult with these sibyls.
Mhm.
So this is all the stuff that goes together. It's quite a hell of a porridge. And that impostature has been ruling the world. And as I say, then when I got into it, slowly way back in the early days, I'm putting all these pieces together and very much in context of what happened in Ireland.
Mhm.
And this Roman circle, as one could call it, the papacy, its role in Ireland has gone up to the present day. What we're talking about happened in the 9th to 10th century. My God, hasn't there been conflict in Ireland? Right up and the IRA and all of that, all these conflicts. The papacy is right in behind that. Many of the top priests in certain districts were commanders in the IRA. How many people actually know that?
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
there were
Yeah.
commanders in the IRA, and at the same time, when an IRA murderer would come for his bloody confessions, they're absolved
Mhm.
by these same priests. That's okay.
Good
You
point.
killed the family and you butchered the children. You shot them in their beds. Say a few Hail Marys, off you go.
Mhm.
You wouldn't believe the horror of it, right? What the crimes
Mhm.
that they were involved in, and they never informed the police. They never would inform when a mass murderer, some of the most heinous people, would come for their confession. They didn't go and alert the authorities.
Mhm.
They just let you walk out. They were in complete control, and they knew everything that was going on. Does anybody ever think about that? All these killers would confess after their mass murders. And the priest sat there and went, oh, well, that's another one for the book. We'll note that. It's all secret. The
Mhm.
power of the confession. Away you and do your, we'll give you absolution. This is a criminal institution throughout the whole world that did this to all the murderers.
Mhm.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So I got very interested in this. And then, of course, there's the concept of the Jesuit order.
Mhm.
And then what happens is, as anyone listening to this will know if they've studied this, there's many, many pitfalls. There's more
Mhm.
disinformation regarding this subject than there is of any. Maybe the Jewish thing, is unequal. But in many ways, if you're not clever and reading the right stuff, there's actually equal, if not more, disinformation regarding the origins of the Catholic Church and its rise to power, and it's also its influence. Now, I was fortunate a long time ago to get into the works of Avro Manhattan, and other people like Father Malachi Martin and Father Alberto Rivera and Charles Chiniquet and a list of others, and get into their work. And this
Mhm.
then started to open the doors. But it became a very deep research because some of the things that they talk about run contrary, slightly contradict the other conspiracy writers who maybe focus entirely on the Jewish question. And we've talked about that, what a dead end that is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And yeah, and they've got all sorts of other, interesting things to say about the world order, but usually they never mention the role of the Catholic Church. So it's sometimes a bit difficult in the beginning to dovetail the two together.
Mhm.
But I persisted. and you start to find out the role of the papacy, what it actually is. This is really, you're talking about here the College of Cardinals, how that all operates, and these and the myriad secret societies that they run. This includes the mafia, by the way. The mafia is entirely controlled by the College of Cardinals, but they have their fingers in everything. So that you find out, as we've talked before, that they're really a cult. We call them the fifth sect, because if you extend Josephus's work, this is what goes on, and he actually created it. Yeah. He was educated by other sects and other groups, the John the Baptist sect, the Nazarene sect, all these sects, and he's taking what he can. He's importing what he thinks is relevant, and he's discarding other things that he doesn't want because he knows the Gentile audience won't go for it. So he makes this new thing, and we're lumbered with it. And although it had tremendous opposition, it has still lasted to this day. And one of those oppositions, of course, was Protestantism. So the last thing I'll say in introduction, but it's going to be important all the way through what we're talking about, is that when Protestantism arose, it arose in Germany of all places. So one of the other interests that I had that brought the exact same issue to bear was, wheeled out again onto the table there, was the story of the history of Germany. Because what we're talking about today also is relevant to what I call Germanophobia. Now, I have a website you may know about called germanophobia.net. And without this particular thesis, nothing we talk about that has to do with the Vatican is really going to make full and complete sense. That's my opinion. You're still going to be lacking a huge chunk, right? And this has to do with, of course, the easiest way to approach it would just simply to be to say, the Vatican never forgave, the papacy never forgave Germany for turning Protestant. And this, we know, happened way back in the 16th century. So what this means then is that in order to understand the conspiratorial aspect and what this Vatican is, we have to understand the role of Germany in this and go back to the time of Luther and, beyond, because what you're getting here is a deep, malicious hatred of Germany and its people. It's not that there's no Catholics in Germany. There are in Bavaria and Munich, right? You still have a Catholic group of people there. There's still Catholics there, just like there is in Ireland, right? Just like there is in other Protestant countries. But they had a particular venom. And the reason why this was even more poignant is because Italy, of course, where is Rome? Where is Rome? It's in Italy, right? Italy was under the Catholic power completely. Austria was completely Catholic. And it's a Germanic country. Hungary, the Slavic country, is also Catholic. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire, look at this now, a whole empire, which included Italy, was all the dominion of the Catholic Church. More lands than that. But this was a power base, right? Power base that could rule the Balkans. It could kick ass. It also had enemies in the Orthodox Church, of Greece and Russia, but it was able to, it knew who its enemies were. It was a formidable force. What is Germany doing coming along and breaking this great combine, this great empire, right? What is the emperor of Germany doing converting to Protestantism? We didn't think that was going to happen. We needed Germany. Oh, and France, by the way, is a Catholic country. So if you really want to extend it, you've got to include into this mix the role of the French, probably one of the most evil countries and with the most evil warlike history imaginable. Everything that Germany has been blamed for, in terms of war and disaster, really belongs to France. But this is one of the biggest airbrushing jobs that's ever been done in history, and you have to know where to go to really find out. And this goes for Napoleon, it goes for France in general. A monstrous country, monstrous. But their role in world history has been played down, and most of the blame has been cleverly, artfully redirected, towards Germany. That's not to exonerate Germany, but it's to show you a dynamic that's been going on. And one of the experts in this is Gustave Le Bon, who wrote the book The Crowd. Well, he wrote other books exposing what I'm talking about. So just for people who want a reference there. Now, this opens up a can of worms. It comes back to the story of the Vatican very big, because Germany's descent, Germany breaking the consensus, changed the world order. But it did more than that. It infuriated the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which includes Rome and Italy. It infuriated the French, who became open enemies of Russia, first with Prussia, the Franco-Prussian War, that also helped change the face of the world. Now, do you know something? It's just an anecdote, but it'll knock you off your seat. On the very day that the Franco-Prussian War broke out, there was a letter on the desk of Otto von Bismarck, right, the prime minister of Germany, of Prussia at the time.
Yeah.
And it was from his ambassador in America. And the letter on the desk said, "We are ready here in America to come into contact, in economic and industrial connection with you, Germany." But this was a triumvirate that had been negotiated by Bismarck during his time with Russia. So the old bear of the North that could never be brought to heel was being brought to heel in an alliance with Germany and America.
That's wild. Yeah.
At the very date, and the letter remained unopened because Bismarck was distracted by the French declaring war. And
That's
the
crazy.
fate of the world, the fate of the world, the fate of America, the fate of the world. So when you have the rise of Bolshevism later on, and all the shenanigans that went on with the overtaking of America, which also includes the Vatican role in the taking over America, people are looking for Jews under the bed. Forget it. Forget it.
Yeah.
This is not the story at all. But then back to the point. They were so incensed, right, by Germany's descent from the 16th century onwards, but then moving into the 19th century, that they've been vowing revenge on Germany above all. Yeah. And they were able to even seduce finally England into this, the British intelligence, the Foreign Office. And do you know why the story goes back to the Foreign Office of Britain? Because they were filled with Jesuits, filled with Catholic agents. Almost to a man, all the heads of the British Foreign Office were Catholic. All right? So there's an incredible story here. And this story has been airbrushed. But Baron Avro Manhattan and some of the other ones I talked about, these are the precious, precious men who studied it and had insider information that blow the whistle on this. So that's a little bit of the background there, to show you what this group has been doing. But the central point for people to realize is this is not Christianity. This is a porridge. This is an imposture from day one, posing as something holy, the Holy See. But what they are is really an immense, evil satanic cult operating in the world, and they have long memories, and they have vendettas, and so my homage to these writers, and to try and a little bit consolidate in a fresher way than what I did with my books, because they go off on another tangent. So I wrote the Red Papacy to sort of just isolate that subject and what they've been doing in modern history, separated from all that background, all the background we've talked about. No, don't get into that. Just let's look at some of the more straightforward things that they've been doing, in the 19th and 20th century, leading up to the fall of Bolshevism and up to the present day. As what that article was hopefully, an introduction into that. But then it also includes the rise of Hitler. So there's some very, very good parts in that article.
Yeah, it's a really, really fascinating article to go through. And even as you were saying about Christianity and about how it was started by Josephus, this is something me and Ralph have been going through in detail in recent episodes. So if people are looking references for that, they can check out those. He also mentioned how they repurposed a lot of astrotheology. Of course, that harks back to one of our previous episodes I'm sure people have watched, but if they haven't, that goes through what the origin of religion is, and it's really an extraordinary one. I think you mentioned in it as well that I think the Vatican is founded on an old church of Mithras. Is that right? Did I have that correct? Yeah.
There's catacombs there to Mithras. There's catacombs to Orpheus. One of the hill, the most important hill, was dedicated to the goddess Venus. Aphrodite.
That's fascinating.
And we have a hill to Moneta, who's a goddess. We've got the cardinals named after Cardia, who's a goddess. It goes very deep. Juno, it's an entirely pagan site. And this has all been dug up, but they, usually mainstream history books will not mention it, or they'll just say it, but when you go there as a tourist and you take a camera and you go around, all you're going to see is images of Dionysus, images of the Green Man, pine cones, obelisks from Egypt. The place is replete with all of these, images that people don't even have a clue where any of it comes from. The street designs included. So there's an enormous pagan element there. Yeah, the whole thing. The whole thing was designed this way and has been this way. It was concocted for that very purpose. But there's a lot of Irish, so-called Irish, or let's put it more broadly, Aryan symbolism there to be found as well.
Yeah, so interesting. And one final thing, if people haven't watched my episodes yet with Ralph, we spoke about people say they're a follower of Jesus and not of the Catholic Church. It's important to know who Jesus was and who Josephus was and who Saul was, the start of the Catholic Church. At the end of the day, Saul, who was the founder, St. Paul, of the Catholic Church, used to... He tried to kill James, who was the brother of Jesus. So he was actually an enemy of Jesus and of their early church, which is a crazy history fact to know. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And if you read the book of Acts, you'll see it. Yeah. It's quite clear. Yeah. We've did a 4-part series, on enslaved. And I bring out this hatred that he had of the Nazarene church because James basically warned his people about Josephus, didn't trust him, and that he was a perfidious character. And I recommend people tune in and watch that. And in response, Josephus, being the psychotic that he was, murdered James. And it's in the Bible in code, of course. But once you decode it, you absolutely find that out, that he had no time for the Nazarenes at the end of the day. So he was going to misrepresent them. He was going to garble their lore. And that's what you get. In his writings, the epistles and the Acts and all the rest of it, you get this indescribable acts of myth-mongering.
Yeah,
and it's taken scholars the devil of a time, you see, to unravel it. And I think that Ralph Ellis is supreme. He's done the best work because I've read all the rest of it, and I know who comes second, third, fourth, in this line. But Ralph is definitely number one, in my opinion. Absolutely wins the gold every time.
Yeah, brilliant. And so I just summarize for people: the Catholic Church is the enemy of Jesus. How wild, isn't this just wild?
Isn't it amazing? That's right.
Isn't it just unreal, isn't it? So yeah, we put together a little bit of a presentation to go through a few things from the article. So I'll call that up and we'll get into it from there. So let me just quickly share the screen. So funny. And so this is from Michael's article titled "The Red Papacy." And one of the names that you'd mentioned previously was this Baron Avro Manhattan, who was born April 6, 1914 and lived until November 27th, 1990. And for a bit of context for people, Baron Avro Manhattan was an Italian writer, a historian, poet and artist. A born aristocrat who wrote about various political topics throughout his career, Manhattan is best known for his prolific and highly critical writings on the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican. He initially opposed the Italian fascist regime, and he was imprisoned for that. His most famous and controversial book was The Vatican and World Politics in 1949. It was translated into all the major languages and had over 50 editions, which is an extraordinary number. He was a very prolific writer. I think he wrote something like 30 different books. Moreover, during World War II, he operated a radio station called Radio Freedom from London, which broadcast to the rest of occupied Europe at the time. Do you want to say anything else just about Baron Avro Manhattan or some of these other names you mentioned? Just before we go further into it, a bit about them.
Well, no, not really. I think what you've got there is the best part. I mean, I love his work. I've read all his books and gone over them many, many times. And as I say, it's a little bit, it takes a bit of time to adjust to his work because of the programming that one might have had from the movement. But there's nothing like it once you suddenly, twig it and it comes of age. And there's an American guy called Eric John Phelps who wrote a book called Vatican Assassins. And those are works that, again, Avro Manhattan was doing, 50 years before. So there is a small group of people that also in America are onto this. And they do attack the Vatican, and they do try to publish works, and they're commendable. But I find them a little bit too fanatical. You see, I know some of these people, and I couldn't really be part of them because they were a little bit too extreme in their own way. There's no point wasting time further on that story. We all didn't get along, even though I support their work. I think Vatican Assassins is an excellent book. It's a masterpiece. And if you buy the book, it may still come with a little CD at the back. And in that CD are dozens of other titles that John Eric Phelps gives you for free on this subject. So it's a great resource. It's a great resource, But there's no doubt that as good as that work is, Baron Manhattan has more of a credibility. And he's more genteel, and he's more urbane, and he's more open-minded. He's not a fanatic pushing some other fanatical Protestantism. He's more like Ralph Ellis, open-minded, and very, very eloquent.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I rank him probably as the greatest. But his work is also very poignant as well. And his books are becoming harder to find. So the one thing I would say is that if people are getting into this, grab whatever you can. Spend the money and get it, because it's becoming very, very rare, hard to find.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, he's a prolific sort of painter and things as well, as I was reading through part of his life. It's really, really extraordinary, yeah.
Yes, he was. He really was. Yeah, he really was.
I'll carry on just a little bit more of the presentation. So sort of what I wanted to do is give a bit of an overview of the Vatican and who's been in charge the last sort of 100 years or so, and about some of the major events. So for some of the people not up to date with it, this is Pope Pius XI, who reigned from 1922 to 1939. We're going to be discussing a lot about sort of World War II and what happens after World War II. So this was the Pope that was leading up to that. One of the things he was famous for was signing this Lateran treaty with Benito Mussolini. This is what had created the sovereign state of the Vatican to act on their own, so they're not under the reign of anyone else. That took effect in 1929. Part of that, Benito Mussolini, obviously the founder of fascism, he had give the Vatican 750 million in cash and $1 billion in bonds in the Italian lira, worth about 100 million USD. This was back in 1929. So imagine with all the inflation since then, that must be an extraordinary sum of money that they just handed over to the Vatican, which is crazy. Following on from him was Pope Pius XII. This was someone that Avro Manhattan mentions quite a few times. So he reigned from 1939 to 1958. And for the non-history buffs out there, 1939 was the start of World War II. And again, he was considered the last of the conservative popes. So you have different factions within the Vatican. You have those who are more hardline left-wing, those who are more right-wing, and sort of the different ideologies that go along with those. And the reason Baron Manhattan considered Pope Pius XII so important is because of his attempt to form a close alliance between the Vatican and the White House in order to offset the threat of communism. He was also famous for signing an agreement with the Nazis, which gave them early diplomatic legitimacy towards Hitler's regime. So this was quite a big figure at the time. Just before we move on to who comes after him, do you want to speak a little bit about what you know of the role of the Vatican, World War II, sort of what was the ideology happening around that time with it as well, maybe of those guys?
Well, you definitely had this factionalism that you're talking about, because even though I believe that the fourth sect had taken over the papacy, about 20, 30 years before this, that can sound like it was a universal takeover. As a matter of fact, it took time. It was a takeover, but it took time. And you still had very right-wing conservative factions that didn't want any of this. The old guard that had been ruling in the Vatican and the papacy for centuries. Where did they go? Well, they still managed to get one of their popes on the throne of St. Peter after this communist takeover, after this left-wing takeover, which I believe happened, in the 1890s. But as I say, this was a very gradual process. And also don't forget that when you have Bolshevism rising to take over Russia in 1917. It didn't just be Bolshevism, and its philosophy wasn't born in 1917. It must have had at least 50 years to mature. And it didn't mature even in Russia. It matured in other countries like Germany and England. Right? Lenin and these people studied in England because they were all exiled. The Tsar had exiled all these, Bolsheviks. The Tsar had Lenin's brother hung, and he had been exiled along with all these other, original proto-Bolsheviks. So let's get that clear. In the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, wasn't the beginning of these left-wing lunatic ideals. They had been already, seeded in other parts of the world. And so what we call the later Catholic Church was fully aware of this move, and they backed it, because in the time before Pius XII, you had basically Marxist popes reigning. There was the left-wing contingent was very strong, you see, but the right wing managed to during the build-up to the war, when Hitler came on the scene, something really remarkable happened, and that is that this right-wing group was able to take over temporarily. That's the one we know as Pius XII. And he immediately, for his own purposes, I'll tell you what they are in a minute, signed a pact or continued the Lateran Treaty that had been signed, by the previous pope. But see, did you know that Pius XI, who signed the Lateran Treaty, before he died, and he died mysteriously, he was assassinated, the year before he died, he rejected the Lateran Treaty and said that the Vatican should never have made an alliance with Hitler.
Right. Yeah.
Next thing you know, he's dead. And Pius XII takes over and goes, no, forget that. We're good. Hitler's the great guy. And because of the support of the Catholic Church, the Catholics in Germany, right? We said it's a Protestant country, but the Catholics of Germany voted for Hitler because Pius XII told them to do that. And the German ambassador was Franz von Papen, who was a Knight of Malta, by the way, and that should make your skin crawl. But they went in and they, because that's the fourth sect, of course, these people said that the Roman Catholics of Germany should vote for Hitler, and that's why Hitler really got the power. Now, this has been airbrushed, but he started in the very town of Munich and Bavaria, right, where this Pius XII had been a bishop, a nuncio. Yeah. And so when the nuncio said, hey, you guys over there in Germany, vote for this man, he's going to be chancellor. And the vice-chancellor was another close associate of the Vatican. He was a papist. So they were all a clique. So Hitler comes to power. And why is this? You wouldn't understand it except for my introduction when I mentioned to you the age-old vendetta that the papacy had to destroy Germany. So Hitler was a papist who was put in to do exactly that, because the Vatican never forgave Otto von Bismarck and the Emperor of Prussia, you see? All of it for becoming Protestant. And they had this long-standing vendetta that the world knows nothing about. The world knows nothing about Germanophobia, which even predates this period. As we said, you could date it if you want back to the time of Luther and the split. It goes back that far. But it starts to raise its ugly head in about the early 19th century, 1850, maybe a little bit before that, because England now comes on board. The Foreign Office, as I said, was in league with the papacy. And the reason for this is that Britain was convinced that if Germany arises and forms an empire, which it was doing at the time, by the way, that the world would be transformed. We already talked about the Great Triumvirate that never came to pass, because the French immediately declared war. Why do you think this was? People can connect dots, right? The French invasion of Prussia was to stop Bismarck from uniting Germany with America and with Russia, because this undermines the British Empire and the French, and by proxy, the papal one of Austria-Hungary, which I mentioned earlier. So these are the real satanic forces, because when Germany's empire rose. It was a benign empire, probably the only benign empire that had ever existed in the world. And these other forces that I'm talking about couldn't allow this and didn't want to allow it. Even Queen Victoria's attack of South Africa. Remember the Boer War? I don't know if you know about that.
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Yeah, and this includes the Dutch, who were traitors to Germany, who never should have ever been traitors to Germany because Germany helped them during the Boer War. So there's a tremendous vendetta there. But the upshot was that Britain came in, wiped out the Boers, the Dutch of South Africa, to take over because there was rivers of gold underneath the Transvaal. And although Germany tried to help, secure the land, it failed. But the thing is that all of this was another machination to make sure that Germany didn't get its hands on that gold and didn't get South Africa, courtesy of the Dutch. Because if the alliance was so strong, because Holland and Germany had a lot in common in those days. But the British saw that and said, no, we can't have that. We can't have them bankrolling their empire. But the world has, through the movies and through the false historians, they've made the German empire look like the most evilest thing on the world. The evil Hun, with their posters and their rhetoric about Germany. It's called Germanophobia. It's been unleashed on the world, and most everyone has it in their heads. So this was to stop the great, and if people want to know more about this, just go to my website, germanophobia.net, and go to the library page and read the first document there. It's all be explained. It's all already been explained. We can't get into it all here, right? But maybe one day we'll do a separate podcast on it. So what this boils down to is that Hitler, they had several other candidates, by the way, but when they found him, they knew they were onto a good thing because he was a psycho. And so they murdered, the Night of the Long Knives was to get rid of all his other competition, all the other generals and politicians, that were also kind of operational, might have also been, taking Germany in a direction. But they said, no, we don't want them, and they're now an encumbrance. We've found our man. We can't believe it. Let's go and murder everybody else. And that's exactly what they did. You can look it up, the Night of the Long Knives. We can make a link to that. But here's another interesting point to this, and that is that he wouldn't have risen to power without the Catholic vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he, through his ministers like von Papen and Reinhard Galen, who's another one, they were Knights of Malta, had a direct pipeline. As you say, the Pope was given back his papal estates by Mussolini and favored by Hitler. Now, this explains why there was this alleged right-wing turn of Pius XII. He paused to make the alliance because he knew that they were going to get this land back and the millions that you just spoke about, all right? And that was a tasty nugget. So they had been dispossessed before that, right? The papacy had lost all its papal states and lost a great deal of its lands. And they were backing, Russian communism at the time. But why this about-face took place and they temporarily went with Hitler and the fascists is because they knew that if they did this, Mussolini and Hitler would do exactly what they did, which is to re-empower them with these papal states and with the money that they had lost. So the duplicitous bastards, right, put a brake on their backing of communism, and people are going to be absolutely confused about this because why would you back communism anyway since it's atheistic? But there hangs the tail. You see, this is politics, nothing to do with what Christians think the papacy is. This is one of the most intriguing things of history. But as I've said to you before, there's no way that communism could even have risen if the Catholic Church had truly been anti-communist.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
But then they put the brake on because it's a realpolitik situation. And if you back these people, and the part I was nearly going to forget there is this. Real scholars know that there's nothing right-wing about the Nazis. They were as socialistic as the communists. It's just two different versions of socialism. So the other scholars make a big mistake when they think that this Pius XII, Pius XII, was making some unprecedented alteration in the plan when he backed Hitler as opposed to backing Stalin. No, both communism and Nazism are socialism.
Yeah.
And the man who doesn't realize that can't get this story straight. So in my red papacy, That's the stance I take. The change in decision is not that hard to understand when you realize that Nazism is a form of socialism and was the preferred brand for some of the popes and not the preferred brand for the other ones. This is the key element that explains the whole damn thing and makes it, because if you don't have that, then it looks very, very strange and you get the wrong end of the stick. The switch, that Pius XII had to go backing Hitler looks like really dramatic and really weird. And, we've got a big right-wing conservative pope here who's backing these evil Nazis. Nazi, the word means National Socialist Workers' Party.
Yeah.
Get it? It's just two different kinds of socialism with a different application. One for the working class and one for the middle class. One that speaks about internationalism and one that speaks about nationalism. But these are minute, right? Ultimately, these are just different approaches. And so backing one or the other is really not as big a deal, you see, as we've been taught, falsely taught. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of like here you can have communism, which is a form of collectivism, or you can have Nazism, which is another form of collectivism. Flip the coin. Which one do you guys want? Fuck your individualism.
Exactly. Thank you.
Which side?
Perfectly said. Yeah. That is exactly it. And so the change from one to the other is matter of like, so we have strawberry today, or should we have vanilla? Right, but it's the same company making the flavors. It's the same sweet.
Both artificial. Yeah. Exactly. I know what you mean. And then you were saying a bit about, the hatred. Why would France not like Germany? Was France, did you see it more as being led by the fourth sect at this time, or was this still more fifth sect being under the Catholic sort of domain, or
both?
Do you want to speak? Yeah, a bit of both.
I'd say that they're both. Yeah, because remember, this is a rivalry that goes on. But even despite that, when it came to Germanophobia and the need to prevent Germany rising in its empire, which, as I emphasize again, would have been a benign empire, a good empire, something devilish came out of these countries, and religion didn't need to apply. There was something already in the core. And this leads us to other things we can't deal with here, because you see, where did this animosity come from? Remember, the English are German. The word England means Angleland, the Anglo-Saxons who came from Germany. So how can the Germans be fighting the Germans? People of German blood entered into 2 world wars with their own ancestors. England means Angles, and Angleland, right? Angleland really means German land. It was settled by Germans and Danes, as well as, earlier Celts or what have you, right? So almost over 50% of the DNA and blood in England is German, yet we have 2 world wars, and the whole fate of the planet was changed by these devastating wars. How can you even reconcile it? Why were they fighting? They're the same blood. Doesn't that tell you that some underhanded force had to be organizing things like that, as it did with the Hitler thing later on? I mean, well, not later on, the Second World War was against him. So there must be some hand, and that hand is known as the black nobility, or better still, the fourth sect. They're the ones who create this havoc, because they are an evil empire, and wherever they, move to whatever nation they end up being, it's their stain that causes that empire to rise and murder other empires. But the German Empire, in its purity, wasn't going to do that. It was thinking of the betterment of the places that it colonized. And it did. If you read the right works, you'll find out that this is exactly what happened. So this satanic other combine had to move. It was demanded, and it moved at least twice. Actually, it moved more than that, because we even have to include this Austro-Hungarian war, the Austro-Prussian war, and we have the Franco-Prussian war. So they've moved multiple times, not just twice in the First and Second World War. They've had other wars to try and undermine Germany for a very long time. And one of the reasons is because the philosophy, the music, the poetry, the mysticism, the religion, if you like, that was coming out of Germany was a very pure thing. And this is not even to speak about their practical abilities in terms of agriculture, machine making, anything you can think of in the industrial, world. It was tip top. And it wasn't exploitative. And remember, Germany was the home of idealism, whereas Britain was the home of materialism.
Yeah.
You couldn't think of two more dissimilar worldviews and philosophies. And the British, what we call the British, was really the home of the fourth sect. When you know it, the Atnists are alive and well there. They have this animus against Germany, and have had it from the times I just mentioned. And so the mere idea that they could now move on Germany and take it down was a juicy morsel they couldn't, and they bankrolled the whole of their country. They killed millions of their own soldiers, millions of them, to do it in two world wars, two frightful world wars.
Mm. Yeah. And when you said about the importance of the Catholic Church back in sort of Hitler, people have to remember back in this time in the early sort of 1940s or before that in the 1930s, if the priest or the bishop above him said to do something, he was the moral authority of that sort of community. And so if every single bishop across the whole land told all of the hardline Catholics who believed it was the bishop who is their line to the Pope, who is their line to God. If he said something, that is what you had to do. And if you wanted to have millions of people revolt in your country because the Catholic Church and every bishop and every Sunday was saying, these are evil people, these are people of the devil, these are Satanists, and so on, you could easily have such an extraordinary influence on people. And you'd also, I think, previously mentioned, I think Hitler, the Nazi movement, was partially funded. It came out of New York. Is that right? There's some sort of link there in the conspiracy field. Can you recall something regarding that? Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, there's Anthony Sutton, Professor Anthony Sutton. His books talk about this. He's not the only one, but he's one of the best ones to show you how it all worked. But he also shows you how magnets within New York and the Boston elite funded Russia, Soviet Russia.
Right.
Both,
Yes, that's
both
right.
socialist experiments were heavily bankrolled by America. Because when that particular alliance with Germany did not occur, then everything from that point on is going to be downhill. Right? When Bismarck was unable to secure the Great Triumvirate, world history was never the same. So in my work, in my belief, I see that the First and Second World War and the destruction of Germany was the destruction of the whole world. Every negative thing that you can think of that you could possibly see today in the world emanates out of this. And so to prevent people seeing this, there's been this awesome propaganda campaign through the British movies, through American movies with Howard Hawks, the propagandist, and so many others. I mean, it's just a nightmare of propaganda that was unleashed. Now, this is not to exonerate anyone. I'm anti-Nazi because I understand what that was. This was one of the greater policies of some very, very smart, intelligent people within the British Foreign Office, and some occult circles. You see, we have this Bulwer Lytton. We have Rudolf von Sombаттendorf. A lot of occult forces were also mobilized in this. I've talked about that. I have a podcast, a premium called The Thule Society, which people can watch. We dig into that. And then my website, of course, germanophobia.net, has some very, very, very important documents on it that will dig into this. But a great deal of effort has gone into try and hiding this. And one of them was the Hollywood, just reeling out one film after another, using their expertise to make it appear that all Germans are Nazis, which they're not, or all Nazis are Germans, right? There was this campaign. And most of it was organized not just to blame the Nazis, who are evil and should be blamed, but also to cover up the horrendous crimes of the British Empire and these especially the French, right? Because the criminals that they are, they wanted to hide this. And so they have bankrolled innumerable historians to write fancy books about Napoleon, and classic movies to show just how heroic this homunculus was. It's just sickening, it really is, when you really see the whole picture. And it comes as a shock to people to realize that had there been a German empire, it would have been a good one, a positive one, the only one that ever in the whole world existed. And it tried to make alliances with other countries, and those would have been very, 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 very productive and flourishing. And there would have never been any violence involved or anything like that, only respect. Because Germany was renowned throughout the world to be the home of philosophy, the home of mysticism, the home of high-minded, Giordano Bruno types, right? And Nicholas of Cusa. The respect went far and wide. But always, 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 there's a little golem, there's a little worm tongue, saying, by definition, we hate this. We want to take it down. Now, this is not to implicate the British people, who I said are descended from the Germans. No, this is to implicate the black nobility, who have no allegiance to any country. They're a species of their own. They're to be found in every country, right? But they themselves hold no allegiance. They may wave flags, or they like you to wave flags. But see, the Windsor family has done a great deal to hide its ancestry, right? Mountbatten is really Battenberg. You see? Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Who are all these families and where do they come from? So they're changing their names all the time. They're dodging it. They don't want you to know the history of their ancestry. Plantagenet. What does that even mean, that word, right? What does the symbolism tell you? Who are they? How many wars have they fomented? How many of their own people have they butchered and murdered? How many sons have killed their own fathers to get power? The thing is monstrous. So if you can find a whipping boy, if you can find a scapegoat in some other country that doesn't deserve it, or you can even infiltrate that country to demonize it, that's what they're all about. That's what realpolitik is. And if you don't have statesmen of the quality of a Bismarck who knows what's going on and can try to counter it, then you're doomed. And so when Hitler rose to power, there was just one mass murder and assassination after another, of all his potential rivals and people who might see that he was a false bastard. And this included one of the greatest generals that's ever lived, Erwin Rommel. He was forced to commit suicide because he, like some of the other German hierarchy, discovered that they had been duped, hoodwinked. Yes? And the Nazis moved in on him and forced him. They said, we'll kill your whole family. So he was forced to shoot himself. The greatest general the world has ever produced. He and his men, he and his, equals, discovered that wars that they should have been winning, battles that they should have been winning, they were losing. And so they worked it out, that they had a traitor in their midst, and the traitor was none other than Adolf Hitler and his closest Confederates. But before they could act, they tried to kill him. Oh yes, Goebbels was in on it. He was a traitor. Yeah, Roman Catholic. Yeah, these were dogs, right? So when the other side, who were more noble and more intelligent also, found out that there was a conspiracy going on, they were all taken out and removed. Yeah, they tried to assassinate Hitler on 3 occasions, didn't work. And finally, the Nazis retaliated by sending in their secret agents and taking these guys out. So why do those things happen? Why was Rommel forced to commit suicide? See, so these are all the breaches. There's many more, by the way. I list a few of them in the Red Papacy article, a few of the things that don't make sense, so that maybe then people can, follow up on some of those points. But I don't hold my breath. The programming has been so intense. So all I did was create my website, germanophobia.net, and present people with the information. So it's there. Just in case you need it, it's there. But I step back because there's only so much you can do, because the propaganda brainwashing and the hoodwinking is so deep that there's certain subjects, that will never. It's like this Palestine-Israel thing.
Yeah.
People are so wedded to the lie, so unobjective, that even when you present hard facts, and I can do that, they don't want to know. So then, you have to step aside. Why beat your head up against a wall?
Yeah. No, you're totally true. Like, there's no point wasting your time. Like, you're not going to convince some of these people, like, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
No.
I'll maybe continue on with a little bit more of the presentation,
Sure.
see who comes up after. Pope Pius II is followed up by Pope John the 23rd. He reigned from 1958 to 1963. He was famous for convening the transformative Second Vatican Council, which is Vatican II, which was to modernize the church. And this is a quote from your article here, Michael. He was an ardent left-wing or right papist who overturned many of his predecessors' policies and actively strengthened the Vatican-Moscow alliance. He was even favoured as Pope by Stalin himself. And who came after Pope John the 23rd? It was Pope Paul the
Oh, wait a minute.
Sixth.
That should have said a red papist.
Red papist, sorry.
Not right.
Ardent left-wing or red papist, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Forgive me reading that wrong. So yeah, he was an ardent left-wing or red papist who overturned his predecessors' policies. And do you want to make a comment about Pope John or anything in that era, 58, 63, or you have me to carry on?
Well, there you go. You see, 2 minutes after Pius is out and the allegiance with the Vatican and the Nazi alliance got the Vatican these lands and monies, they stab them in the back and go back in communism. The next pope is not back to the way it was before. We're back in the Bolsheviks. I mean, what kind of slime balls are you dealing with? Yeah, I've got pictures on my website of these bishops making Nazi salutes. You know, we've got knowledge that later on there's a thing called the rat line, in which some of the right wingers, so-called, help Nazis scientists escape to America, right, in Argentina and Uruguay and places like that. But that was all at the behest of this black nobility. And what we don't understand when we look at that rat line and Operation Paperclip, which I have always brought to the fore, is that the movement of these Nazis after the war wasn't only to America and the West. We've got to understand that another homeland was the East, right? Iran, Iraq, and Egypt. You see, because for years, since the beginning of the First World War, there was a very strong alliance with the Ottoman Empire, that we haven't spoken about yet, and Germany. And so what we know now is Turkey, in other words. So the Nazis had extremely close connections with some of the most elite families within Turkey. And most of these elite families were left-wing communists. So again, you see, if you spoke this to people, they'd be all over the place. They'd throw up their hands and go, "What are you guys talking about? Nazis don't hang out with communists." And that's when you shut up and change the channel, right? Because you're talking to people who can't hear you. But as a matter of fact, this is exactly what happened. And many of the leading Nazis, the brains, they didn't stick around to be arrested and taken to the Nuremberg trials. They exited quickly with all their paperwork and all their money and all the Jewish loot, the diamonds that they'd stolen, right, and all the treasures of the Jewish homes. And they headed over to Turkey, where they were well received by these left-leaning, pan-Arabic, pan-Turkic elites. And they lived in luxury there. This has all been airbrushed. And they fomented the Islamo-Communist, or even Islamo-Fascist, you can use either word, alliance. Because neither side forgave the West, and neither side gave up on the agenda. Right? So when Germany fell, these leaders moved, not just to America, which is the famous one, movies were made about it, and everyone knows about Operation Paperclip. No. The more deadly group moved east to places like Turkey and worked to form Islamo-Communism. Because there's one thing that Islam and the Nazis have in common, or let's say the socialists, and that is the destruction of capitalism. That's what the Hitler movement was really about. People couldn't accept this, but that's what it was about. If you read Mein Kampf and the other writings and the speeches of Hitler, he's all against the capitalists, or what he calls the industrialists, and he's against the Jews, not because the Jews are racially Jews, but because they were the leading capitalists in Germany at the time. You see? Yeah, he made some racial remarks about them, but that wasn't the real reason he hated them. He hated them because they were rich and powerful and successful, as they are wherever they go. And he knew he could rustle up the rabble, right, as you always can. In the history of Judaism, this is well known, that the rabble, with a flick of the switch, you see, will immediately rise up against the Jews. And so this was wheeled out yet again in Germany of this time. And Germany had been very good to the Jews before this. Otto von Bismarck was the one who gave them more rights than anybody else. He freed them. But within a few years, this was to change. Because you know why? Because they do very well. They were freed in something like 1860, 1890 by Bismarck. But the Jews did so well so quickly that this then was easy for some scumbag like Hitler to weaponize against them. People who were not as productive can easily envy and hate those who are. And this is exactly what happened, because the Jews were rising to the top, not just of banking and all of these things that we would expect, but of many other intellectual pursuits. Yeah, they were becoming the genius class. And this, of course, can easily be weaponized, as it was. Yeah, but the papacy sat back and let it happen. There are occasions where a couple of bishops and cardinals, tried to help Jews, but that's their minority, and they fell foul of the authorities. The College of Cardinals was totally anti-Jewish, wanted them wiped out, wanted them to be used as scapegoats. The story is absolutely incredible when you get into it, and also to rob them blind of all of their assets. And those assets were put into Switzerland, into banks there, but also banks in northern Italy. Yeah, it was a hoard. Dispossessed. Some of these things very, very precious.
Yeah, and what happened with a lot of the money, from my understanding, I think after World War II, instead of confiscating it from the Swiss, it was the Vatican, the bank, that took some of it in order to sort of keep it protected out of those other hands with it too.
Yes. This has been whistleblown in certain movies. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I believe it. Yeah. There's been books written on it, brilliant books written on this that, I can recommend. I think I have a lot of them listed on my Germanophobia site. There's a library page, which has a lot of brilliant links. But see, don't forget that even though that's a small website, it's a lifetime of study. And you can't just brush through it in a second. This is a lifetime study, and will also knock people for six in the beginning. They have to adjust their settings. So that's why I said there's a bit of a learning curve, because it approaches things quite differently. How many people could ever imagine that a German empire would have been a very holy and very productive and benign thing? We don't even have an image of that. No, because the propaganda machine of Britain, and especially France and other places, has been overwhelming to make them look like they're divine. Yeah, they've done a beautiful smear job to demonize Germany, and people just can't think straight when it comes to it. They don't know the histories of Germany at all. This is one of the greatest things. Yeah, they don't even know that anecdote that I told you about, that England actually means German land. Go figure.
Yeah. And people should definitely listen to our previous episodes. We went quite a bit into German idealism and about this philosophy of freedom, and mentioned some of the greats like Hegel and Fichte, and definitely go check them out. We go into detail of that. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. How can it be evil when you have these kind of philosophies coming out of it? It really was extraordinary.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'll carry on maybe just for the next pope, and that'll set us up for maybe our next couple of questions here. So let me come back. So again, we had Pope John the 23rd from 1958 to 1963. As I mentioned, he was the guy that convened this Second Vatican Council, Vatican II, which was to modernize the church. This was carried on further by Pope Paul VI, who reigned from 1963 to 1978. He continued this Second Vatican Council, which closed in 1965, by implementing its numerous reforms. And this is again just from your article here, Michael. He went out of his way to fill the Sacred College with leftist cardinals. His overtly progressive outlook warned anti-communist papists of things to come. His main ally was the pro-communist Cardinal Benelli. He was a progressive. He focused on the progress of peoples, and was very influential in terms of looking for global social justice, which is a phrase I'm sure people have become very familiar with the last decade. He criticized liberal capitalism as well, and he called for things like wealth redistribution, as well as higher taxes on the rich and whatnot. So some of the main themes of what you see about the woke is coming up there. This social justice, tax the wealthy. These are all common themes. But maybe to ask you first off, have you any comment on Vatican II? What was that about modernizing the church? What was it that these guys were looking to implement there, or have you any
Well, it
comments
was
just overall? Yeah.
I look at it as a sign to the whole world of something they were hitherto keeping secret, which was the presence of the fourth sect and the takeover. Vatican II is a sign, a flag, right, to the whole world of Catholicism. You've been taken over. And that this original conservative paradigm is over. We've won. We've had some resistance. We've had some prevarication. We've had some double dealings, but it's all straight now. And we don't. And also, the second thing that it would have instigated is exactly what you said, the wokeism. There's a blend now of something they couldn't get right quite before. They, going to the hard Bolshevism or going to the hard Nazism, they realized wasn't working. They needed something more sophisticated. That's why I call it the rise of Euro-Communism, right? This article is subtitled that, because they worked and said, we have to blend the two together. It wasn't right when some popes went towards Hitler and Mussolini and some other popes went towards, Stalin and the Russians. This is a foolery. We've got to find something that blends them together in the middle. And this is then, what I call the shadow communism. And then when you've created that, Vatican II was its inauguration, its implementation. So these are the years when the Vatican is now making a sign. I mean, they're not going to rub it in. They're not going to explain it in detail, naturally, because that would upset the whole world of real Catholics all over the world. They don't want to know that their religion has been taken over. All these people in Spain and Portugal and everywhere else, right? In Ireland. No. They've the mummery has to continue, right? The dumb show. Let these proles think that there's just been this little bit of social reform. And one of the biggest things that was entered into their head, that these pundits on TV and these other spokesmen would say, is that the Vatican popes are telling you that Jesus was the first socialist.
That's it.
It was a fucking dream, right? Whoever came up with it, God knows, they deserve a medal, because this was a formula. This was a motto that really helped kick open the door. And also then you just had these popes getting around more. There's more media on them. There's more attention. They're making all sorts of alliances. And then, as Baron Avro Manhattan says, they decided to have the alliance with Washington. You see, they said, let's drop these other silly alliances with these rebel factions. We've got to get America on our side. It's full of dumbasses. Right? I mean, they're not very intelligent. But there's a large Catholic contingency there. Contingent. And we'll get our men like Reagan, and before him, Teddy Roosevelt, who's the first one to have opened, connections with the Vatican. We'll have our Jesuit agents and some Hofjuden in there as well. And they'll turn things around. And this is exactly what happened. And the left-wing thing that you're talking about was already in the world anyway with the Jesuits. Because their order was, founded in the 16th century, very early on. And then we know about also the Knights Templar, going back to even the 13th century, who we now know weren't Roman Catholic at all, right? Like the Knights of Malta. The whole thing has been a ghastly make-believe story. Yeah, the fourth sect has been operating through these secret societies. The Jesuits are a secret society. And all that you're getting with Vatican II, and then later John Paul II, is the final, act in a play that's been going on for years. Where now they're never completely open, but now they can be more open about it. Let the world kind of know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Job done, we're sailing. And within 10 years of that, the wall comes down. And Bolshevik communism, the experiment, can be rolled up. Mm-hmm. What the hell are we talking about here, right? See, to explain that is really something. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. As you were saying there, a lot of what Vatican II, I understand, it was to make it more appealing to much more of a global audience. This is one of the reasons, and to dumb it down, it's for about all the poor. It's about this is why they stopped saying mass in Latin. Was one of those reasons with it. Said in the
Yeah.
simple language of people nearby, and it was all about again, as we said, these social justice things became one of the main themes of the Catholic Church. But this leads us on to who comes after then. Pope Paul here. So we had Pope John, we had Pope Paul, and naturally then it gets Pope John Paul, who takes his name from those guys.
Right.
So he had a very sort of, it was a short stint. He was known as the September Pope, I believe. He was only a Pope for 33 days. So he died mysteriously in his sleep, apparently from a heart attack at just age 65. There was no autopsy done at all, and there was initial inconsistencies in the Vatican communications about, there's different stories about who discovered him. Was it none? Was it a secretary? What was he apparently reading and not? There was a reason why they didn't bring the doctor in to see him. So there's clearly something going on behind the scenes of these different factions as we've been discussing. And so following on from Pope John the First becomes Pope John Paul II, who was again from 1978 to 2005. A little bit of information about Pope John Paul II. He was the third longest in the papal history. He was the first non-Italian pope in 455 years, which I thought was quite interesting. There was an assassination attempt on him as well on May 13th in 1981. He was shot in St. Peter's Square, but he survived. He was given a role regarding communism and about the ending of it in Poland. But again, this is all complicated history. There's the veneer of what people are told, and then there's the behind the scenes of these different factions fighting each other. So yeah, you were saying also about Pope John Paul, about how the Vatican was reaching out to the rest of the world. I think he visited something like 120 different countries, and he was like the first pope to leave his Italy in centuries as well too. I'll need to double check that one, but I'm pretty sure I'm along the right lines there. And then this is just another little quote from your article, Michael, which I'll read, which I think gets on to what you were speaking about. After the Second World War and spread of communism throughout Europe and the world, powerful individuals within the Holy See not only openly backed communism, but secretly conceived a socialism of their own, aimed at the subversion of existing political systems and the restoration total papal world control. Instead of a crude draconian Bolshevism despised by one and all, theirs was to be a relatively benign collectivist socialism established with the approval of every slave under it. With the death of Pope Pius XII in 1958, a long era came to an end. From then on, the Vatican's role in world affairs drastically changed, and those who opposed the swing to the left found themselves unable to return Catholicism to the way it had traditionally been. The conflict between factions began because of a brute fact that stared the Vatican in the face. Traditional religious belief was sharply declining. Clearly, the forthcoming age was one in which the new generation believed not in medieval, infallible theology, but in humanity and science, materialism and intellectual progress. Since nothing could be done to assuage the tide of individualism, dissent and revolution, the Vatican decided to piggyback on whatever political leviathan dominated the future, be it fascism or communism. Have you any comments on that, Michael, just about, this change in terms of the psychology of people? It used to be all about theology. It's all about what God says. We had the advent of, science, rationalism, the Enlightenment principles, and then we've seen sort of what new role the Catholic Church was going to take on then. It's about this socialism and soft socialism compared to the hardline Bolshevism that we've seen previously.
Oh, yes. Well, you see, it would have continued. Nothing would have ever changed, except that the world itself changed. The youth. These agents of the Vatican were watching, and they had no plan to change anything. Their war was going on nicely behind the veil, and the world need not know anything was taking place. But as they were moving, because there's no fixed point in the universe, the world, the geopolitical situation was changing. Youth were dropping these idiotic religious beliefs. Great scholars had come up. They were showing its pagan ancestry. You had David Strauss in Germany. You had many of the early people starting to uncover all the fabrications of the Bible. And so they were rocking the boat. And what was happening was there was just a zeitgeist change. People all over the world were committed to a more secular existence, having fun, right? Look at the 60s, but even before that, there was a tremendous enlightenment, if you want to call it that, in terms of breaking away from tradition all over the world. And this vice hold, we can even think about Ireland here, the Catholic Church's vice hold can backfire, because a country that's been held down like a spring, right? This goes for these third world countries or underprivileged countries like Ireland. If you ever let go of that spring, bang, right? Things just explode. And so the Vatican felt it was losing control. People wanted prosperity. They wanted freedom. There's an instinct within us all that wants that. And with the many, many crimes of the Catholic Church and these priests, people were starting to dissent. Ireland was full of dissenters. Yeah. Patrick Pearse and Daniel, O'Connell and many others were starting to voice. They were starting to question religion, and you had others as well. James Connolly, for instance, you see. And so they were noticing that when a great many of these top intellectuals throughout the world break, look at James Joyce, right? When they start breaking away from us, they tend to go left wing, almost exclusively. Oh, and in fact, most of the names that I'm mentioning, and this includes, Eugene O'Neill and many of the other writers in Ireland, but all over the world, they all seem to turn towards the left. So the Vatican is shaken by this, you see, and they say, we're going to have to do something here. And so naturally, the first instinct was to align itself with communism, to sort of meet the teenage discontents halfway, to say, hey, we're still relevant, we'll back you. But then as they moved forward from that point, my guess is that they realized something extraordinary, that they had more power. They didn't need to keep on writing the tales of communism. They had the ultimate communists within their ranks, Jesus Christ. They could do one better. This didn't occur to them originally, maybe. But they suddenly realized that these long-haired malcontents from America, these, or these beatniks, all these people would identify with their long-haired Jesus. All they needed to do was give him a bit of a makeover.
Yeah.
And emphasize, he loved the poor, and he came from a humble background, and he was speaking to you.
And he hated the rich.
And he hated the rich, and he turned the moneylenders' tables over, blah, blah, blah. And of course, what they're doing there is working on your psyche, because no matter what you are in the life, you have existential problems. You have questions about existence. And it doesn't matter if you're a communist or a rocker or a mod, you see, or a hedonist or a druggie or whoever. They knew that every single person has underlying psychological hang-ups. And their Jesus is made to order. But you've got to give him a makeover. You've got to soften the image, soften the focus. Let's try it. And what do you know? It fucking worked. So they realize we can even dispense with communism because it's atheistic. Because, and being atheistic, we're always going to have that breach. Our working with it is only going to be sort of slightly temporary and kind of fraught. Because how can it be that a religious institution like the Catholic Church is going to work permanently with atheists? It's very temporary. It's not ultimately a proper marriage. So this is where then Vatican II comes in. They say, yeah, we've tried it, we've experimented, it only goes so far. And by the way, this Bolshevik type of communism is quite unpopular anyway. Don't be fooled. It breeds revolution of its own. It breeds reaction. We don't want that. That's short term. It could be overthrown any minute. It's full of inconsistencies and is deeply anti-human. It's not going to be the template. Somebody warned them, some very high intellectuals from the College of Cardinals warned them and said, watch out with your flirtation with this because it's terminal. And they all agreed. They sat around and went, yeah, you're right. It might look strong and attractive to people today, but we can see into the future, this thing is not really going to last. We've got to perfect it. We've got to make it more sophisticated. And they did it, and it worked. Their system has worked. So they secured their own existence. Now, they kept the veneer on the top to let, the more of the proles, the idiots, think that nothing really had happened except some necessary reforms. And that's where we've been laboring under this illusion since the crowds all turned out. I think this assassination of John Paul II was bogus. Personally, I don't think it was. I think it was another media attempt to get the cameras and the TV and the Americans fascinated and interested in this character. I think it was all faked.
Fascinating.
Yeah, because they were obsessed with getting him to be more popular. The plan was underway. They knew it was leading up to the wall coming down. This was all predicted. They have so much power. They could mobilize this. They could get their men in power. So they got Mikhail Gorbachev. You know, they were able to get these. They fund. And how you do this is just by funding the people that you prefer to get into positions of power. And the Vatican has been doing it for centuries. They're very, very skilled at doing it.
Sure, they used to pick the monarch. You know,
Yeah,
who's going to be the king ruling the country? You know,
oh,
that's
yeah.
whoever the Vatican says, whoever the Pope says is what you're going to
Yeah,
do.
and they subverted the Orthodox Church from way back. So the Orthodox Church of Russia is not what you think. It didn't stand in the way of anything. And the Bolsheviks, when the Bolsheviks were strong, it worked to keep this Orthodox Church of Russia under wraps. They couldn't squeak. They'd be sent to concentration camps or murdered, right? So Stalin and all had them cowering. Yeah, so but this papacy is not to be messed with. They're very, very powerful. And they control many, many other secret societies and groups that they can mobilize in an instant. I mean, they control the British Foreign Office. And that is a very powerful organization that itself controls MI5, MI6.
Yeah.
So it can get things done very easily. And Avro Manhattan is the expert on that. His work, you'd be gobsmacked when you realize what's been going on.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned the fall of the Berlin Wall, which brings me on to the next wee slide here.
Oh, yeah.
So again, this is another quote from your article here, Michael. The Berlin Wall is torn down. The year was 1989. What led to this remarkable moment in history? The sudden fall of communism throughout Europe? Was it a spontaneous and legitimate people's revolution? Or was it due to the long-laid plans finally being triggered by exceptionally powerful hidden forces? More importantly, did it signal the death throes of communism? Sadly, the answer is no. The fall of the Berlin Wall and disintegration of Bolshevik-style communism didn't mean the end of socialism. Far from it. The Red Papists simply reorientated themselves and designed a new improved brand of communism, customized to suit the times. And just onto the final slide here, I'll read out. The Black Pope and head Jesuit Pedro Arrupe was assassinated in 1991 by order of John Paul II and his confederates in the US government. He and his Jesuits had become something of an embarrassment to the new Red Papists, who shied away from appearing as extreme leftists. The hardline socialism of the Jesuits suited the poor and downtrodden, particularly in countries south of the equator. It was not as suitable for the middle and upper middle classes of northwestern climes. This is why the Jesuits were eventually compelled to fall in line with the intrigues of the Red Papacy. Those who refused were removed and replaced. Do you want to speak a little bit just first about the Jesuits, the role of the Jesuits, the Black Pope a little bit again? Or I think we covered in our last talk. I'll maybe just refer people back to that actually. I think the main theme of what we've been chatting about, again, it's the end of this hardline communism, of the Bolshevism, and it's a repackaging of it. So not many people like hearing people in their streets shouting for revolution of their country and of overthrowing. However, if you go out there with a soft voice and say, I'm for social justice, people are more likely to follow along into that. And what you're largely getting towards is that this new line of the Vatican, of it's being more globalized, it's about the world's poor, let all the immigrants into Europe, let all of these things happen, and it's all about social justice. Is this really just what we're talking about? It's just about a repackaging, a change of the sort of the psychological language to make it more appealing?
Oh, undoubtedly it is, yes. Mob rule plays a huge part of this. And the Jesuits were one of the first people early on to discover the power of the mob. Just use the right phrases, just talk about the endless injustices, and you're on your way. In fact, this is classic left-wing, communistic rhetoric anyway. But they were onto it. The fourth sect were onto it in the bloody first century. So it's nothing new. You see, we think it's something new that arose with Karl Marx or whatever, right? No. Karl Marx himself was nothing but a cleric. He was a deputy, an exon of the fourth sect and the black nobility. Hitler was a cleric and an exon of the black nobility. It all goes back to them. You see? That's why this article is an adjunct to the ones I have on female Illuminati. They're all to be taken as a family of articles exposing what's been going on. But you're quite right. Some of these Jesuit leaders, like the Black Pope and some of their others, also had come from working class backgrounds, and they were committed to this Bolshevik style because they saw what it did to the mob. They were convinced there's no other way. So it took a little bit of time for the red papists to bring them to heel, the Jesuits. They weren't about to change their spots. And some of them were so extreme, they went, no, don't shake up what we're doing. So they were assassinated. They were taken out because they went, oh yeah, you don't give us orders, we give you orders. So any of the Jesuit leaders who were sticking to the old Bolshevik type of thing, and same thing in Ireland, any leader there that wouldn't go along, with the plan, who committed still to the hardline leftist thing, like James Connolly and others, they were executed. They were taken out. Right up to modern day. Yeah. These McGuinnesses and Jerry Adams and John Humes, they all know how the bread is buttered. In the beginning, they may have started off more extremist, in the sense of being more left-wing, but that quickly changed. They got the feeling of the, mahogany tables and the tweed suit, and they learned, and they were warned. They were warned from up above. And so they laid down their more anarchistic ways and became, glove puppets of this fourth sect. They were all, many of them were already committed, members of Young Ireland, which is, of course, the Templar connection there, right? All these communistic groups. But these communistic groups themselves were being infiltrated by the red papists, the shadow papists, the shadow communists, and say, we're going to soften up, just like you said. We're going to change the script. This is the way to get the mob, the disgruntled mob, work on their envy, work on their psychological hang-ups, keep talking about oppression and capitalism being evil. They're still doing it today. That's how you get all these wokies running around.
Yeah.
And we've got our people ensconced in the media. Yeah, this is the real conspiracy.
And just to clarify for people, when we speak about who runs the world, we've been speaking about the black nobility, and that they have now control of the Vatican. Is that correct? That's what you're saying? These guys are the fourth sect who took over about in the late 1800s. And just to reiterate for people, just as the macro view of this all, the whole point of this new world order of the black nobility, it's about bringing in world socialism. That's really what we're talking about here. And I guess what I wanted to ask you as well, do you have any thoughts on the role of the Vatican, of traditional Catholicism in what we're going into, which you've referred to as the age of transhumanism? How does religion play its role when people are going to become maybe more atheistic, or how do you see things going forward with religion and the role of technology going ahead of time?
Well, remember, they realize that no matter what changes that are happening on the surface, man is basically a crawling, frightened creature, beset with all sorts of existential anxieties. This is where they put their money. And they realize that there's a sort of a ethos of the youth who just want pleasure and nothing but pleasure, right? Then you get older, and then you get these other malcontents and discontents who are older now. They're starting to worry about death. The pleasures are a little bit more insipid. So they're guaranteed, right? That's why the churches are filled with old ladies and stuff like that, right? So they know. But of course, over time, though, and I think you hinted at this, the actual interest in religion has been waning really, really steeply. And so as this has happened, don't you see that the Catholic Church has got more and more interested in politics as the interest of the people in religion has got less and less and less? So they're securing their role by becoming much more secular, by becoming more interested in geopolitics. And they're not staying out of politics. And nobody's demanded that they should. Yeah, we've allowed it. Again, it all comes back to us saying, hey, can you keep things separate? Like church and state used to be separate. But that was another thing that was hated by the church. They go, we don't like this idea that church and state should be fucking separate. We want back in. So as the interest in religion has got less and less and less, their interest in politics and what's happening on the street corner has got more. To the point where now they're so ensconced in world government or the EU and orgs like that they can let the church on the side of the road just fall into ruins. Half the churches in England are just in ruins. The Muslims are, turning them into into mosques and day centers. They're crumbling because they don't care about that anymore. That's wrapped up. Now they're involved in charities and philanthropies and all sorts of other shit. They're not standing up against the spread of Islam. Not one. I got pictures on that same article of the Pope kissing the Quran.
Yeah.
In the very article we were looking at, people go to the red papacy, and you'll see it. They become ecumenical. Yeah, they become ecumenical. It's disgusting.
That's mad, isn't
it? Yeah, they're not pushing against. They're no longer a force. And by the way, there's a couple of people, a couple of bishops and within. A couple of priests within the church who do stand up, but they're immediately nobbled. They're immediately called reactionaries and lampooned or excommunicated.
And just as you were saying there, hopefully you can see that this is your article here, Michael. You were saying about the Pope kissing the Quran. Isn't that unreal? Isn't it? Isn't that just a crazy thing to sit and look at there?
Yeah, he gets around. Yeah, he gets around.
Yeah. That's mad.
So this is the complete overturning. But they won the world. You see, the world is in their palm of their hand. They can steer it whatever way they want. Their great achievement, first of all, was the destruction of Germany. They couldn't think outside that. And when they saw that communism in Russia was anti-German, they backed it. When you understand Germanophobia, a lot of things make sense. It was easy for this Italian circle to warm to Russian Bolshevism because Russian Bolshevism was against Germany. They were great enemies. Russia and Germany have always been enemies. And as we said, the moment when that was going to be turned around was during the time of Otto von Bismarck, but it failed. History, you can cry tears over this because it left England and it left France in rulership of the world. And it didn't threaten the Vatican. The Vatican got off the hook massively because Protestant Germany could not make an alliance of ironclad power. So it already won. Then it moved on Germany itself through Hitler, a few years later, 1930s. It won that. Germany was laid low. In fact, Germany had been laid low in the First World War. So the group that we're talking about had nothing but successes under its belt. I can't think of any times when it didn't. There was a time that Baron Manhattan talks about the great effort by the Serbian military to destroy the Vatican. There's another thing people don't know about, right? I can't remember the name of the general, but there was a Serbian general who was taking planes and he was going to bomb the shit out of the Vatican, actually bomb it into non-existent.
Wow. Yeah,
and it failed. That mission was scuttled. So they won that. The Japanese threw the Jesuits out in the 15th century, never to let them back to this day. Japan has been on guard against the Catholic Church from the 16th century because of all the things we're talking about. But other countries, that's why Japan has been incredibly prosperous, by the way. They've kept the priest and the black robe out of their fucking civilization because they had enough of them. The time that the Jesuits were in Japan taught the Japanese, we don't want these fucking people.
Yeah.
But the rest of the world, no, we're bowing and scraping, falling for every one of their machinations. Half the stuff we're talking about here, more than half of the stuff we've discussed here, people have no clue. No clue. I know it. Yeah, it'll blow them away. And that's why even when I've got some peeves against some of the modern writers on this, like I said about John Eric Phelps, it doesn't matter. Their work is good. I don't care about them. I won't let my personal disputes with them or whatever get in the way of their work. You see, because it's vital that everyone comes to the table on this. Yeah. So people should pick up the book Vatican Assassins, read it. Use the resources that I've made available.
Yeah.
Because that website wasn't thrown together in 5 minutes. Neither was this article. There's a lot of really good stuff there.
There's a lifetime of study.
Yes, absolutely. There is.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think ahead of time, like what I'm going to be seeing ahead. Trying to think of links between what's going on with this transhumanism stuff, the Catholic Church, I think of the ideology of what runs, you know, of the fifth sect, of the Vatican, of these religions is a throwback to this Gnosticism, which essentially is this denial of the body and denial of the world. It's that we're a spirit trapped in the body. And it's that I see as the linchpin that links between it and transhumanism going forward, because that's the whole point. You're just a spirit trapped in the body. That's why you can change your gender. That's why you become a bloody robot, become whatever you want. And it's no doubt that, there's still going to be a massive role of America going forward, especially with technology and with AI. And it's conspicuous that there's all of a sudden an American Pope at the same time. Have you any thoughts about there being an American Pope then, Michael? Or
No, not really. I mean, it was inevitable. It's inevitable. And I look at that as being a way for the Catholic Church to continue to galvanize the Catholics of America, who might have been also backsliding. They may have put this guy in because they knew that America, which has a huge Catholic population, but some of that population may be dying off. And some of the young may not be as ardent. So you put in an American Catholic, and maybe he can rustle up more of the interest, give it a shot in the arm. But one thing I'll say about your transhumanism question, and that is that C.S. Lewis wrote on this extensively, and he said that there is a contingent within the papacy that says that the God that they've been worshipping of the past actually doesn't exist, but he is to come. And he comes when man approaches this singularity. So we had this sort of phantom God, a shibboleth, in the past, but actually he doesn't come into concrete existence until the computer age. Yeah? And this would be the way that you would, conceive of transhumanism, and some of the bishops and the College of Cardinals signing on for it. Because they believe that in some way, when man gets to this level of the organic computer, the organic computer moves into a kind of a metaspace or hyperspace where suddenly it becomes the God, or it channels what becomes known as a godlike intelligence.
That's so interesting.
Yes, it is interesting.
Oh
and
my God.
So what they claim is that all priests have been wrong and right. Their work of believing in the old God of the past has been right to the extent that it forecasts the real God. But it's wrong to believe that this thing in the past was a true entity. It's not. It's just a forecast of something that will come to be, but man has to move up to a more of a quantum level first. He's still got evolution to do. And this was picked up by, Catholic priests like Teilhard de Chardin. Yeah, he's a figure that people can look into. And also, if you want to look into a concept called the noosphere, spell N-O-O, sphere, noosphere, all one word. Yeah, we can maybe make a link to that. The Teilhard de Chardin. He was one of these proponents of this. But you have others as well, like Thomas Berry. There's a whole school of this, in which they ultimately believe that it's through a transhumanist model that the real God appears to the human race, and that everything before has just been a sort of a poor draft, a poor foreshadowing. Good enough for us in this magical child animistic, earlier phase. But we have to move beyond that into the real religious sphere, which is yet to come. So when you spoke of transhumanism there, it jogged, my thinking on that. And people, again, will find this new or preposterous, but there is actually a coterie within the Catholic Church. And now they claim that Teilhard de Chardin was excommunicated for this. And that may be true, but it didn't stop him gaining converts all over the world. And he spoke about what's known as the omega point. So maybe that's another thing people can look up, omega point. And it's at this point, he has this elaborate theory that everything in nature and everything in the cosmos is moving slowly towards this omega point where there will be this revelation. And the real God will be, manifested at this time. It bears similarity to some of Hegel's idealistic theories, absolute idealism, but it tends to be more along, whereas Hegel did not bother talking about any kind of computer technological, evolutions, Teilhard de Chardin does. He thinks this will involve, chemistry, physics, psychology, computering, right? He had this vision. So I would direct people to that, because your transhumanists are definitely going to have his books on their shelf. They are going to be schooled in that. If they ever went to school like MIT or CIT or any of these schools, but they also have a religious bent, my guess is that they will be very, very up on these theories. And when you get your characters like, what's his name, Stephen Thaler, these creatures are actually reiterating the work of Teilhard de Chardin. They're putting it into their own words, these transhumanists. So that's what I would direct people to do. And C.S. Lewis also whistle-blew this in his own writings and adamantly believed that there's going to be a change within religion, the religious types. This coterie, this technocratic elite, will start to slowly put out its message, and it'll be a transhumanistic one in which the God is to come. We're making him. It's like an egregore.
It blew my mind, this.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are actually creating the God that will rule over us by some sort of mentation, and that the steps along the way to make the organic computer, all of these different things, the nanotechnology, whatever you've got, this is all relating to that, is building and creating this God that we will want to then submit to.
Yeah.
It'll all make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, if you look ahead, like, where is AI going? By
Well, yeah.
2030s, like, I think it's at the end of next year, it'll be smarter than all of human knowledge all put together of anyone in. Now, again, obviously, this is the machine. It's not like real life. It's not actually thinking of it in terms of just sort of book knowledge. But if you put it forward another 5 or 10 years beyond that, which is again into the late 2030s, they think in the early 2030s they're going to have much more of this singularity where AI is going to be like a god speaking to us. And that's going to be in every single person's phone. It's going to be in everything you're interacting with. You're not going to have apps on your phone to go into. What you'll have is you'll just speak and it'll listen and it'll provide everything. But you're going to need somebody who can sort of speak on behalf of this, and you can help to channel this new God coming in. And I go, well, where's all the youth going today? Because at the end of World War II, you have obviously this liberalism that has been the political ideology that's been going on, this sort of Weltanschauung of the Western world, which seems to be sort of collapsing around us. And one of the things I see people trying to latch on to help to steady themselves in this existential sort of existential chaos that they're sitting in, it's traditional Catholicism is being one of the main things. This is what the whole point of Nick Fuentes and things they're all chatting about. And so if you have AI coming, you're having, this artificial God that we're creating, as you're mentioning. You're going to need people who can help to interpret it for the masses. Who better than an American Pope who's going to be right in place for it in the 2030s as it's coming along, who speaks English? And some of these things are starting to add up in a really weird way, Michael.
And if it's not him himself, he'll be there as a sidekick backing up the people's champion who jumps up, a new Elon Musk or somebody like that. He'll be there to support, just like Charlie Kirk or somebody like that. It always just takes the right people's champion, and they know how to pick it. Yeah, they really do. And then it's backed up by these priests who you would think, what the hell are they even doing around this? This is meant to be antithetical. But they have a doctrine, as I just explained, or C.S. Lewis explains. No, they have a secret doctrine that's ready and waiting for this. They have a mandate, they have a doctrine, and they'll wheel it out to the surprise of everyone. And Teilhard de Chardin is one of the closest that presaged this. His work will be wheeled out again, maybe in a slightly different form, but basically it's going to be that. And there's innumerable so-called philanthropically minded scientists who are already convinced that their neurology and their work with the organic computer and their work in AI is all to the benefit of the human race. Robotics, lunatics like this Kurzweil and others, right? They all believe this. The world is actually top heavy with them. And although we're not seeing the connections between that type of elite and religious types, it's there. When it comes together, it'll do so in its own time. We don't see it yet. We think the two are massively divided. No, they're not. Don't be fooled by that. Yeah. And C.S. Lewis drew us a picture of how they'll come together. And this will then solve the problem of why religious people who might have drifted away go, I called to God, I prayed, there was no answer. It's because that God is of the past. That God is not there. He's to be. And you're just not in the right frame of mind. You're not praying to the God that is yet to come. You don't understand something yet. And this can become hypnotic. This can become very, very easy, to get the more modern, postmodern type of mind into this. And they work on hang-ups. They work on the fragmentation so that you'll cling to anything. In the end, you can have even some sort of monstrous, like you mentioned, demiurgic, H.P. Lovecraft God. And what the fuck? Right? The mindless zombie who's in pieces in his psyche will cling to it. They work on several levels at once. Create this image, this effigy, but at the same time, cut out the soul of a person, drench them in neurosis and psychosis, and they'll bite down on anything that you hand them tomorrow. Fuck,
I know what you mean.
the wife sitting on the couch is going to be a fucking bot, a robot.
Yeah.
So do me a favor, right? It's already halfway there. We're already very, very close to this. It's a really form of dehumanization. Yeah,
Absolutely.
but they've got their ideology, and it's a very interesting thing to follow. This transhumanism is leading there, and they've got their sort of Deepak Chopra types, these Stephen Thaler's and others, these pundits who really cleverly, they make it look like it's yoga. They make it look like it's mind expanding, right? They've got all their sort of symbolism and their globalist rhetoric to suck you into this new world religion, courtesy of the computer being an interface. It's on its
And
way.
so do you see one of the plans then of the New World Order? It's just to bring about this new type of religion, and this would be one of the parts of the new kind of control that they're sort of planning up. And maybe this is too tangential to our conversation, but we haven't really spoke anything about UFOs or aliens. I'll maybe leave this as a whole separate conversation, but I've heard some people within conspiracy circles speak about aliens, new religions, blah blah blah. But we'll chop that off and leave that for a future episode people can look forward to. We'll maybe keep this just to the Vatican for here. Our last 3 episodes have been mainly on this theme of who runs the world, and I think we've been pretty clear about this black nobility, the history, the competing sects. Is there anything finally you'd like to go over, Michael, you think we haven't mentioned that you'd like to bring up, or anything on the topic that we have discussed today, if that sounds all right?
No, I think we covered it brilliantly, and your summary there was excellent. I'm glad you even brought up this transhumanism thing, because I haven't thought about that for a long time. And I think, Professor Lewis's theories have been with me since the 80s on this. But see, one thing I will mention, and it's the same thing for my Germanophobia side or whatever, this is a huge subject and requires a lot of learning, a lot of study. This has a lot to do with the assassination, for instance. One of their great successes was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. We haven't had time to talk about that. But if Abraham Lincoln had lived, Catholicism would have been annihilated in America, or at least brought to heel. He would have been the one to warn America of this papal plot. So my guess is you could still be a Catholic in America, but you ain't going to be forming no secret societies, and you would have had very limited influence in the American government. His war against the South was a war against the papacy. Do you know that?
I didn't. No,
That's
that's
right.
fascinating.
So he was assassinated by Jesuit agents. And he had got on their dark side many years before when he was a young lawyer. It's a fascinating story. Yeah, he was in his youth when he already fell foul of the Catholic Church. So they were keeping a black file on him. And they tried to assassinate him on previous occasions, by the way. History doesn't tell you about that. And they finally succeeded, of course, in the famous case that we know, right? With John Wilkes Booth, who worked for them. But the reason why they had to get rid of him is because he was 100% on to their gig. And like Bismarck, he was one of these characters who was going to change the world. Yeah. So that assassination also is one of their great successes. They've marked up many, many successes. Yeah.
Fascinating.
But I think we've done wonderful coverage. So, yeah, I mean, and maybe in another day we'll do something more on Germanophobia. But in my introduction of this program, I tried to bring up some of the different threads. There's many as to why the Vatican felt empowered, why their focus primarily was Germany, and I think once you've downloaded those things and realized that France, Austro-Hungary, Italy, and then finally even England was brought in, you see, these have been the greatest enemy of the German people. Yeah. And once you understand that, a lot of things now start making sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. There's lots for us to go forward onto, and
Mhm.
I was thinking maybe another topic is maybe just about the occult itself and about some of the main figures of it. You'd mentioned egregores earlier on there, which I found a very fascinating concept. And if people are not familiar with it, these type of psychological entities or psychic entities that can be formed over time and whatnot. But yeah, we'll leave that for another topic. And if anybody watching has any topics they'd like us maybe to cover, please leave it down in the comment section below. And just as always, thank you everybody for coming by and for watching. Please like and subscribe. Again, it's massively helpful for new channels. I really, really appreciate it. And any last words, Michael, or should we wrap it up there for another week?
No, mate, thanks a lot for today. It's been exhaustive, and I think people go through the article. There's lots of great links as well. Definitely visit Germanophobia, even if you only read the first article on the library page. Just click on it's all been designed with that in mind. Just read the first document there, Germanophobia, and it'll be a big eye opener, and maybe we'll do something on that, down the line. There's so much more to get into, but I think this has been a brilliant introduction, for open-minded people at least, to review what's been going on and to explain some of the anomalies that other writers they failed to deal with, they failed to touch.
Yeah, brilliant. And so, everybody, make sure you check out these different websites. Check out michaeltsarion.com. Check out Unslave, where Michael does this podcast with David, and it's really fantastic. He went into so many of these topics there. We'll leave links down below to when we spoke about, and we'll definitely do an episode in the future on this Germanophobia for sure. And so, once again, thank you everybody for stopping by. We'll see you next time. Cheers, Michael.